Hi, everybody. Today, at the Intergenerational Women Leaders Initiative, we're actually hosting a very special friend and ally for a long time, my dear Katia Legisa. Um, we have been working together on leadership issues, career development, EU, sustainability, digital transformation, and she's now bringing us an amazing new project that she has been developing with other very expert professionals like Eli Parna. It's a pleasure to have you with us too. And we have Barbara Prendotta, who's also an ally in this process. At the Intergenerational Women Leaders, we usually do events in person around topics, different topics that affect women in leadership in different periods and life cycles. So both at the entry point into leadership, those that are approaching what is traditionally considered the end of the career, and that those in between that are facing multiple challenges when they evolve through their career, trying to balance work at home and work in the office and work at home, etc., etc. So all these dynamics and bringing the best of the knowledge, the wisdom, and the inspiration and stories and experiences and lessons learned of all to empower each other. And today this is a very special topic, and we are recording this video for the women out there, and not only for the women, for the men, because this non-consensual sharing of intimate images online has becoming a very, very big problem, and many of us are still not aware of it, and it's still very much a taboo. And those who know me and us in the intergenerational community, one of the things we want is not to allow space for taboos around issues that are so important and that need to be made visible, and so that we can have tools to approach them. So without further delays, I would like to pass the floor to my dear Katia, who is going to explain a little bit about the project. And see you in a while. Talk to you in a while.
Thank you, Claudia, and good afternoon to everyone. And welcome to the awareness raising on sexually related online risk. Today we will talk and approach the topic of non-consensual intimate image abuse. And this topic has been developed, this workshop have been developed together with other partners in a European project called OnSafe, that basically wants to equip people with necessary knowledge and tools to prevent being exposed to sexually related online risks. And so today I want to go through this workshop, which wants to be only an informative session that wants to give you some tools, but also how to do and how to cope in case something happens, because we know that it's a topic and a situation that can happen not only to you, but also to people that are around you. And very often it's very difficult what's going on with people around you, especially if they are teenagers and they are not so outspoken about these things. So knowing how to deal with certain things is just easier to go. And now I will leave the floor to my colleague Kelly to deep dive into the topic. Thank you.
Thank you, and hello everyone, whoever will be watching this. Thank you for joining. So indeed, I'm going to present the topic. I have some slides, and maybe just from my own side to say that it is an important topic, but it can also be difficult, perhaps even triggering. So I will talk about it with as much sensitivity as possible. But just to let you know that obviously we are unpacking quite a difficult subject here. But as I like what Claudia said, is that hiding from it and making it a taboo is definitely not going to help here. So I will just get into it by sharing my screen. And opening the presentation. So as already mentioned, the topic today is the non-consensual intimate image abuse. And to make it easier, I will just stay to the NCII, as it is short. So what is it really? Sometimes it's not entirely clear what that means. Very, very basic, the online distribution of sexually graphic photographs or videos without the consent of the individual in the images. So what that means is it can go from a very, very simple photo of you in a bikini to really what we would call a sex tape. So it can have very, very different levels as well. But the main concept, the main understanding of it is that if the person who is in the images or the people have not given their consent for these images to be distributed, it is considered NCII and it is very illegal. There is a video that I will also show just to clarify the topic a little bit, and then we will continue.
Survivors of image-based sexual abuse online say it's soul-destroying and humiliating. Tonight, we can reveal so-called revenge porn is rising in the UK. Police records seen by this programme show a significant increase in the number of women and girls reporting explicit images of them being shared online without their consent. Ruby will never forget clicking on a website when she was 17, discovering intimate images of her being shared. At the time, it completely crushed her confidence. I'm just wondering, what kind of effect has all of this had on you?
So I'd consider myself quite a confident person. I'm a teacher, so I'm used to kind of public speaking and being in front of students and imparting knowledge or whatever. But actually, immediately after discovering this, I felt quite paranoid. It did stop me a couple of times when I was out. If I was going to the post office and there's maybe like a group of men, maybe in their early 20s, I was a little bit cautious, and in the back of my head I was thinking, I bet they've seen the website. So yeah, it started to infiltrate my thoughts a little bit.
Channel 4 News submitted freedom of information requests to 45 UK police forces. Of the 34 that responded, nearly 19,000 reported incidents of so-called revenge porn were recorded between January 2018 and August 2021. Of those, more than 4,500 involved a partner or former partner, but just 4% of those reports to police led to a summons or charge. Some of the alleged perpetrators were as young as 9.
We're seeing younger victims with younger perpetrators. We're seeing collecting behaviour, trading behaviour, where victim and perpetrator don't necessarily know each other. We're seeing manipulated images proliferating where the content is completely fake. But it's all causing harm, and that's where we need to start seeing some redress and support for victims.
But here's the thing. While a new law was brought in 2015 in England and Wales to tackle intimate abuse, campaigners say that legislation currently lags behind the technology. Essentially, perpetrators have become much more sophisticated, and that original definition in law of intimate abuse is way too narrow. It leaves many loopholes.
The law as it stands has a specific requirement that is an intention to cause distress on behalf of the perpetrator. And while that captures a lot of behaviours, by no means all. We're seeing a real rise in content being shared for the sake of sharing that content, collecting and trading that content. And for those perpetrators, they just need to say that they didn't want to upset her, they didn't particularly want her to know, and it removes that intention, which means there's no justice for that victim.
While the government's draft online safety bill was criticised by a group of MPs for not being clear or robust enough to tackle illegal and harmful content online.
Bottom line is, we should be safe to live our lives how we want to. And yes, you need to consider online safety, but this is exploitation and this is abuse because it's targeted, and that's what needs to stop.
Survivors say the current law is simply out of date, leaving abusers off the hook and many women feeling like they have nowhere left to turn.
Well, so that's a small overview, and we will go into more detail about many of the things that were mentioned within this video. So just to continue, this is also a case study from 4 years ago, in which Anna, whose name has been changed, was contacted by her school friends. And she was 27 at the time and was based in Berlin. Her friends said there were pictures of her online that weren't supposed to be there. Anna found a dozen photos of herself, some nudes, some bikini shots, some headshots published on various porn sites without her knowledge or consent. She says there was also a picture of my Facebook profile, which resulted in me getting a lot of private messages. I got many compliments on my breasts and also many dick pics. Later, Anna realized that her Dropbox was hacked and concluded that the photos were taken from there. And to this day, they have never actually found who had hacked her and placed those images online. And we will come back to Anna's story because it's one that is a bit more positive because she was actually taking more action. But this is just one example of what can happen. And it's extremely random even because, you know, her Dropbox got hacked. So yeah, I would really like to talk about the legal considerations, and as in the video it was mentioned, there's a lot of difficulty still when it comes to legislation, and one of the things as well which I mention here is why are we talking about non-consensual intimate image abuse versus revenge porn? Because I think revenge porn might be the term that is more known, or we've heard of that more. And so the reason being is that actually the word revenge implies that somehow the victim has also committed some kind of a wrongdoing or infringement against the perpetrator. However, that is not at all the case. As also in the movie it was mentioned, these situations are extremely often, they happen within relationships actually, or by an ex-partner, because they want to hurt the person that has ended the relationship, and in some cases it can be also done as a way to manipulate someone in a relationship. And also the term porn has the implication that the picture or the let's say the video is some kind of also a creation of content that should be shared, because when we hear the word porn or pornographic, it's immediately kind of triggers this image of something that is for mass consumption, which again is not the case. It is completely legal to take nude photos of yourself or share them with your partner, but if that is then shared to someone else, it is illegal. And yeah, the term pornography conflates the private visual material with public content meant for mass consumption. And now legislation, again, there is this whole question of concept. Unfortunately, what we probably as a collective might say, this is immoral, this is wrong, and outrageous, etc., does not always reflect in the legislation, because unfortunately when you go and you go to the police and you want to report someone, legislation is applied as it is written down, and currently it is really not the best. As also mentioned, the legislation is not catching up with the evolution of the technology. Technology is becoming more and more sophisticated, more and more people are using technology, and we are just not catching up. There is also the complexity of the victim experience, because it is very difficult to measure the impact. As an example, if you get your wallet stolen, you can go and say, I had my wallet stolen, I had 200 euros, my documents. It's a little bit easier to put a number on it, to sort of understand what the impact for you was. Whereas in this situation, it is, because it is usually very psychological, mental impact that it has, it's extremely difficult to yeah, let's say put a number on it to say this is what's going on. And as mentioned, it's moral and ethics versus legislation. So just a little bit of history. The basic that used to be talked about was voyeurism, and that was actually, in the days, it was meant that someone was sort of sneaking up on you, and let's say the very kind of cliche of boys peeking at girls during the gym, after gym class, in their changing rooms or something like that. So also, when I talk about legislation, I am talking here about Belgium, unless I say otherwise. So actually, the first case when voyeurism was put into legislation was a case in Flanders of a gym teacher who had been taking pictures of girls in the school changing room after gym class, obviously without their consent. It was for his private viewing. However, when that all came to light, he was fired, but because there was no legislation on that, he was actually never prosecuted. In 2020, there was new legislation, and people started talking about illegal distribution, added element to the consent. So before that, we were really talking about voyeurism, which would always mean that someone who would take a picture would use them for their private, let's say, viewing. However, finally in 2020, it was also clear we needed more legislation on distribution as well. And this was also in parallel to some new legislation on rape cases, meaning, I don't know if you are aware of this, but for example, there was a huge loophole in legislation in many different countries where rape was defined as something very violent. So basically, you could report rape if you had proof that you were fighting, shouting, trying to run away. And in many, many cases, as we all know, one of the reactions to violence can actually be a freeze response, which means that you do not scream, run away, or even try to fight anyone off. And when these cases happened, there was actually no rape applied to those cases. So this is also something that has been changing and has been fought for in many different countries. So 2022, this law finally passed. We can now really have this legislation and say my images were distributed, and there is this understanding of NCII now a bit more. With that, there was also a rise in cases, and it's also a good thing, because very likely that is also because more and more people felt safe to actually report now. So I apologize, I see there's a spelling mistake. It is March 2022, there was a new EU legislation proposed on an EU-wide notion of the image-based sexual abuse. Because again, of course, this being the EU, not every country has the same laws. And this was actually voted now in April 2024. It passed, but not fully. There were certain articles that were not accepted, and not necessarily good ones, because, for example, this law now does apply a lot, but only to porn sites. It still does not apply, for example, to social media, such as Messenger on Facebook or WhatsApp. Because apparently it was thought more important to keep the privacy legislation. And also there is a case study that is in this presentation. It's linked there, and you can read it. It is quite heavy read, so yeah, do so at your own discretion. But the bottom line is that, again, there was a case of sexual assault, which was at the same time filmed and then distributed. So even though the victim was able to report for the sexual assault, she was not able to report for the distribution of these images, because there was, again, no clear legislation. It was just considered as like an aggravated version of voyeurism. So this is just an example of why it's so extremely important to update these kinds of things. So just some other notions, perhaps, that just to know, because if ever these topics come up again, we talk about other things as well. Upskirting, it's a bit of an old term, but it is basically, again, a little bit like voyeurism. So it comes from men putting photos underneath women's skirts and trying to take photos. It still actually happens, believe it or not. And now, of course, the bigger issue there is that, again, it's not only for their personal use, but it gets distributed as well. There is also deepfake. It's actually celebrities' images being used, so kind of a montage of nude pictures, so you can actually never even tell if they're real or not. There is also the immense rise in AI. And as an example, there was just a case last year in Spain where several schoolgirls in the same school discovered their nude images on a website. And when this was looked into, then they were actually not even real images. So these girls, their faces were taken from their social media and put on naked bodies of models or we don't even know. And then last but not least, all of this is, of course, connected to some other topics that we also present sometimes, which is sexting and sextortion, because, yeah, one can lead to another and one can start from one. And so they are very much interconnected. I do see something in the chat. I don't know if there's a question.
It was about the case study. If we can share the link of the case study, maybe at the end.
Yes, okay, I will do that. Yes. So have some numbers here on NCII in Belgium again. So there were, in 2016, 130 reported cases, and in 2020, there were 830 reported cases. Overall, in EU in 2020, there were 3,146 cases. However, of course, real cases, we have no idea because not everyone reports, as probably does not come as a big surprise to anyone. Another fact is that around 90% of the victims are women, young girls, even young adults. This does not, of course, this does not at all mean that it does not happen to men. It's under slightly different circumstances. For example, the other topic that I mentioned, sextortion, tends to be much more about men. So that, yeah, they get basically blackmailed for money. And the other thing, very likely as well, is that even less men report these cases, because we also have this sort of a taboo of men being more sexual, so surely this does not affect them in any kind of way. And some questions on the rising numbers or the bigger numbers is one of the main reasons is also lockdown. During lockdown, during COVID, there was a lot more people who were engaging in dating and sexual relations online for the very obvious reasons, and of course, therefore, rise in those numbers. As already mentioned a bit, there's the gender biases. Generally speaking, NCII is used a lot against women and young girls because sexually, it's still the woman's body that gets exploited more. And at the same time, also the flip side is very often men's naked body or sexual images get laughed off a bit more as well. So perhaps the impact of it is not, it's not even considered as much, how much it impacts the men. And again, advances in technology. More and more people use technology. We're much more online. And nowadays, it's even impossible sometimes to know what images are real and what are not. Who are these perpetrators? So in most cases, it is an ex-partner. unfortunately. The content may have voluntarily been shared between the partners, which again is legal between consenting adults. However, once the relationship is over, one of them makes the content publicly available. And this can be perhaps just sharing with their friends. And I say just because I'm not saying it's okay, but sharing with their friends. But in worst case scenarios, it is really put on to dedicated websites. It is shared on porn sites. It can be shared even with family, friends, workplace. So again, very, very different levels of harm as well. Why are people involved in NCII? So we go back to this word revenge. Again, not a great word, but the perpetrator feels hurt and feels like they have right to take revenge. And they use these intimate images or videos to inflict harm. And as actually in the video was said, one of the loopholes in the UK legislation is that currently revenge porn is worded as there is intent to harm. However, it is of course no longer the case because sometimes it is about distribution, and it's very easily you can just deny and say, I did not mean any harm. It is definitely a way to publicly shame or humiliate the victim. And I think considering our, the group and the group of women that I'm presenting to today, it can also affect women in leadership a lot. And I'm sure we've heard of cases where either threats online, especially rape threats, or threats to put out some kind of an image of them is used as a way to silence women in leadership. This happens a lot to politicians, for example. And again, it doesn't even need to mean that they actually have your images. These can be faked very, very easily. And we have seen so many cases where women's image or even how they are dressed or what they look like or etc. is often used to humiliate them, to diminish their power, their impact, etc. So this is definitely something that affects women of all ages in all positions. It just for different reasons, of course. There can be jealousy or envy, feeling threatened by the victim's current or potential relationship, or again their position in power. Even there's cases of women who are actually fighting against the NCII, who then get these things happen to them of like fake images of them made and then being threatened with it. It is a way to seek or exert power and control over the victim. Sharing explicit content without consent can be a way to manipulate and intimidate the victim. And in this case, we do talk about sextortion. So, for example, a partner who may blackmail a woman to stay in the relationship by threatening to expose their images, that is a form of sextortion. So, so what is the impact? Going to go here. Probably does not come as a surprise. It is emotional distress. Victims experience intense emotional distress, psychological trauma. As the girl also in the video said, there was a lot of paranoia. There was a lot of damage to their confidence. The violation of the privacy. There's a betrayal, especially if it's someone that you know that has done it to you. There are very big feelings of shame, humiliation, of course, because again, there is still this huge taboo on women's sexuality. If your nude picture gets leaked, gets shared, then oftentimes the first question asked is, why did you take this photo? Why did you share it with that person? And this is a very, very blatant victim shaming. It is not their fault, and it is absolutely the fault of the person sharing their image. Damage to self-esteem. There is public exposure. As I said, if this, for example, gets shown at your workplace, It can have very big damaging effects, even firing you. I'm sure we have heard of cases, or perhaps you've read an article of a teacher being fired because a nude photo of them was leaked. There's a relationship strain. It can be a strain on existing relationships or further ones, because very often victims fear the judgment, so they don't want to talk about it. They isolate themselves more and more. When you isolate yourself, it has a huge impact on your relationships. And again, as I mentioned, impact on your professional life. There is also cyberbullying and harassment. So again, different levels. For example, we can often talk about in case of adolescents, there is obviously huge shame. For example, if it leaks and goes out, it's in school situation, it can have extremely damaging effects for someone who is still in school in a developmental age. But it can also have an impact, as I mentioned, for example, a woman in a leadership position, in a position of power, a politician, can have very, very damaging effects and damage on their reputation. Social isolation. So out of fear and shame, the NCII abuse victims withdraw. They withdraw from social activities, from friends and family, and it can really, really lead to depression, very damaging effects, and in some cases, it can also lead to taking their own life in very extreme cases. It can have legal consequences. It is extremely difficult to navigate the legal process. It can cost you money, it can cost you time, adds again to the mental trauma, to the stress, because let's be fair, going to the police, they do not have the resources, the knowledge how to handle these cases. And there is just very little understanding of how to do this. And again, it can have huge long-term trauma as well, depending on how far it goes. It all depends on so many aspects, right? It depends on our age, on our mental health already, our social status. It depends on what our family situation is, how much support we get from our social circle, cultural background, all of those things. So coping with NCII, if this happens to you, if this happens to someone that you know, what are the steps? So do not engage in hate speech and revengeful behavior yourself. Delete all accounts. Do not delay reporting while you try to solve this issue on your own. Do not isolate, do not feel ashamed, and definitely do not blame yourself for the situation. So again, it is extremely important to understand that even if it feels like an unsolvable problem, the more that we isolate ourselves and do not share or talk to someone who we trust, the bigger the issue gets in our heads, the more inclined we are perhaps to not even deal with it at all, to not report it, maybe indeed try to take it into our own hands, and it just makes it worse and it does not solve anything. What you should really do is absolutely request the removal of your personal content. In most websites, if not all of them, at least there should be a way to ask for content to be removed. It can be a tricky process, but it is possible. Preserve all evidence, no matter what you have, even if you feel like it's very shameful, but do preserve the evidence, because whenever you go and report it, you need as much evidence as possible. Do absolutely report the case and get legal advice. I mentioned a center there in brackets, but it's also in the next slide, so I will come back to it. Absolutely change privacy settings on social media as well, and absolutely focus on your self-care and seek support, even if it's just one person and you can find, even if it's an online center where you can ask for support if you don't have that within your social circle. But do that, because even just sharing with one person, it will already help and make it less, end of the world in your head. So I have here a list of different websites. And the first one is Anna Nakt, and I told you we would come back to Anna. It is the girl actually from the woman from our example at the beginning. She was one of the rare people who did actually really fight for getting her images taken down. She explains very detailed how complicated that was, and because of that, she actually founded this website where she gives practical tips and advice to people who find themselves in the same situation. There is the cyber helpline, revenge porn helpline. There is Institute for the Equality of Women and Men. So this is the website that was mentioned in the previous slide. So this is somewhere where one can turn to as well if they need legal advice. Because as I mentioned, just going to the police can be very, very, very tricky, if not even damaging, because there have been cases where they just do not know how to cope with these situations. There was a case of a girl who had her topless photos shared, and the police did not know how to deal with that because there was no tracing, and they actually told her like, but it's not so bad, like it's just topless, it's, you know, it's not even porn or whatnot. And so these kinds of centers, they really help also navigate that. There is an NGO called stopncii.org, and there is a Belgian center, SAC, Sexual Assault Center, where also one can go for everything from psychological help, medical help, to legal advice as well. So these are of course things that are online, except for the SAC. It's really a center that you can go to. Everything else is online, is very, very often founded by people who have actually been victims themselves, civilians. So unfortunately, it does show that it's just very often the victims, or perhaps family of victims, who start then helping others with this. A lot of them, especially Stop NCII, does also, let's say, fight for more legislation, for more clear legislation, for better legislation. So there's a lot of good people out there fighting the good fights, let's put it that way. I think just the takeaway from all of this is that there are ways to fight it, to get your images down, and there is help out there. And for whoever it happens to, one of the main things is never, ever, ever blame the person, and absolutely seek help. I see something in the chat, so I will of course put all these links into the chat as well. I think that's probably what will be requested. So that was the end of the presentation. Thank you so much for listening to me. And if you have any questions, doubts, comments, we can have a chat now.
Thank you, Hallie. For now, we have only Barbara asking if the resources are from Belgium. And as pointed in the slide, the very last one is the Belgian.
Yeah.
The Belgian.
So the center is Belgian. They have services in French, Flemish, and English. All the other ones are websites. They're mostly UK based. Anna Nakt, for example, she does write in French, in English, but also in German, because she's based in Berlin herself. But so in any case, all the other ones, they are online. So it is actually online help, which can actually be even more helpful because perhaps you don't have that where you are living. I don't know about other EU countries. I do know a lot of countries are getting these specialized centers specifically for sexual assault victims. But for NCII, it's a lot of online help. And oh yeah, and actually, I'm sorry, I forgot to mention that stopncii.org, what they also do is they do this hash generation technology now, which is that actually if you have images of yourself, you can contact that organization and they give you sort of like a code for your images, so that if you should ever have a doubt about where they end up, you can actually track your images and find out if they have been leaked or posted somewhere illegally without your consent.
Thank you so much, Ellie. I propose we spend 10 minutes with some thoughts and some questions. First of all, of course, this is a topic that, working on the areas I work, I see, but I didn't know a big part of what you just presented. So thank you for that and for the work that you have done in this project to put all this together, because I know from experience, when we open a new field on where we're starting to work on a new topic or a new area or a subtopic, the most important and most challenging thing is to actually start to get data and to actually start to understand the reality and the dimensions of the problems, and that's before we get to understand the dynamics, and so that then we can devise the solutions or the strategies or the tips or the recommendations. So it is a long process, and I see that this must have been a lot of work already. I was just some thoughts to start with. I was very shocked as a mother, as a human being, so not as a professional, to hear that perpetrators could be as young as 9. That was something really shocking, because of course when you think in terms of these issues, you always imagine a mature man revenging, and this was pretty shocking. I took a lot of things, and at the end of the day, everything needs to be victim/survivor. I don't like the word victim, even if sometimes we do need to use it, but survivor-centric. Everything needs to be survivor-centric, and the systemic level is about law, is about policy, is about enforcement, is about education. So that's really the base, that it's still not there. So it's very much, now that you know, with initiatives like this project and the ones you've mentioned, it's like creating that beginning of a systemic transformation, and then is creating the awareness around these women in this case, and young women, that entails multiple sections around them. It's like a constellation: family and friends and the front line. So how to educate families, how to educate people to be aware of this, so that we can talk to our children about it. In schools, how do we educate the teachers? How we educate the children? How do we talk to them about this, so that a 9-year-old doesn't become a perpetrator? And how do we support those that might be already in the front line of living this at ages where there's no possibility to actually understand what's happening or have any defense to deal with this? And of course the workplace, because this doesn't happen, as you said, just to very young people. This happens to women in leadership. And I was even thinking, if we think from this intergenerational perspective, I even read, thinking of this conversation today, I was reading a bit, trying to get more data, and I realized that for older women that are more than 55, 60, that might be divorced, alone, not very good with technology, it's very easy for them to share intimate images with potential romantic connections online, and that also ends in these porn sites of these mature, and they don't even know, and it's very rare because in that segment of age people are not even, it's not like the young ones, that the case of Anna, that someone told her, because they are all in the same digital bubbles. Older people have this happening and they don't even know what we're talking about. And the deep fake adds this layer that is still another challenge for which we are not yet ready. And it's happening already and we are not ready. So you've mentioned what not to do, not to feel. You gave tips on what and where this support can be done, like fantastic. I think that is absolutely fundamental that we continue, all of us. And for those listening to this conversation, I call to you, reach out to all the people around you, mothers, fathers, employers, employees, teachers, your children, educate people about this. Look in the links and find out what this is all about and the challenges that the people around you might be living isolated, that might lead to very lifelong traumas, and that we cannot allow and that we cannot condone. And the other part is, what can we do as those that are around, that want not to be passive bystanders? What are the signs? How can we, if there's already tips for this, because in sexual harassment, we can already know a little bit what are the behaviors we need to be attentive to be active bystanders, and to create protection around the potential victim. And in this case, what can we do?
Well, yeah, that's there is a lot of unpacking there, and I agree with you. But so I would I've written a few thoughts down. First of all, it's also not very black and white, you know. Very, very often it is so mixed. Like, I will give an example. There was a case perhaps 6 months ago in Ghent, here in Belgium. It went to court, and it was around 5 girls in their early 20s from Ghent University, and they had been blackmailing adult men, basically sextortion, right? And when it went to court, it turned out that actually the images with which they were then getting these men to engage in sexual things in order to extort them afterwards were actually put together with bodies and faces of celebrities, of influencers. So that is NCII, right? And on top of that, the lawyer of 2 of these girls then said in court that actually those girls claimed that they were forced by their boyfriends to do that in order to, again, something like their family safety or so on. So there's all these different layers of I found that case a very fascinating one, simply because there's basically all these different aspects of what we talk about were involved. So that's one thing.
And what happened? Sorry to interrupt your
going on.
It's still going on.
Yeah, it is currently in court. The other thing is, you mentioned the age, and I think it is a very, very important aspect, because again, when we talk about when we talk about children, it's not even just NCII; it's already child pornography as well. But I think there is a very, very important thing that we can touch upon, is that first off, the age in general, like generally sexual age these days, is getting younger and younger. it's in the statistics that that teenagers are more younger who are engaging in sex or sexual activities, and phones. Much younger kids these days get phones. And so I would kind of play the devil's advocate and say that, you know, how we how we give out sexual education also depends so much, because again, there is still so much of this taboo around women are the sexual objects and men are the ones who kind of, you know, consume.
Stereotypes. Yeah.
And so I do wonder whether that 9-year-old who was the perpetrator was also even aware of what that was about, and not just being told by their friends like, hey, be a cool guy and, you know, take a picture. So again, there's all these levels of exactly like how we educate and how we talk about these things.
And how we educate the educators, and how we educate the judges, and how we educate those that need to make the laws and enforce them, and the police, etc., etc.
Well, but right? I think this is for me always what we need to think about is how we talk about it, because again, it is just the fact that, for example, we have a very common thing now happening, which is sexting. You know, send your images, talk, you know, dirty online. And it's legal. If you want to do it with your partner, do it. But then there is this part where, especially younger girls, they feel like it's something they have to do because everyone's doing it, right? It's like you're not cool otherwise. So you kind of have to do it. But then if your image gets shared, it's again your own fault, because you were the, you know, sorry for the word, but you're the slut who did this, you know. So it's also this you know, constant, like I said, you know, when it happens, we don't go and say, oh, I'm so sorry this happened to you, how can I help you? A lot of people, even if they don't have bad intentions, their first question is, why did you send the picture? Why did you share it? So if that's how somebody approaches when you confine in them, then of course you're not going to go and talk to someone and trust them and want to talk about it. And it happens constantly.
It's like a vicious cycle. You have the basis, which is a lack of education, in this case of sex education, a lack of self-confidence and self-knowledge and self-awareness, because it's also related to age. But this lack of self-awareness and self-confidence can last a lifetime. But it's worst, of course, when it's younger generations. Plus this peer pressure that is very strong, especially in younger groups, to do things like the others. So yeah, all the actions you just mentioned, that then goes together with the peer rejection and the peer blame and the victim blame. So it is the basis, and I'm thinking with you, right? The basis seems to be the longer term strategy is to build the self-confidence. So as parents, as friends, as employers, as mentors, as teachers, is to build, educate, and build self-confidence.
I think, if I may, it's a self-confidence and self-awareness in terms of, okay, what do you feel confident about doing? Because again, no one is obliged to share anything. And so again, if you don't want to share, then just don't, because I think, again, there's this, that there is, it's like, as a woman you can't win, right? And I for example, I'll take the example what you mentioned about women who are old, like in older age and leadership positions. So also obviously someone who is also already much more confident, but if you look even then how they're talked about, it's like, you know, either they're like this like gray mouse, they're not sexy or whatnot, so then it's a bad thing, they're not supposed to be. But then on the flip side, if they actually then do like share some kind of an image, then again it's wrong, because as a woman in public or something, that's not where you're supposed to be. So it's almost like you can never be the right thing anyways. And I think it's
double blind.
Yeah, and so it's very, very difficult to say exactly what to do, because it depends on the ages, on the situations, on people. But it is very much about how we talk about it and how we see women especially. And for younger people, for me, I'm convinced it has to be part of sexual education. about, you know, because it's there, it's happening, whether we like it or not. And it's very important that we talk about it in a as non-judgmental way as possible. And
if I may jump in, I think we should first start here, talk about it. It should get out of the gray zone completely in all levels. So I hope you can hear me. So first we have to talk, we have to be aware of that, and then we have to put the judgment away, because very often, at least in sextortion, what happens very, very often with young people is that they don't open up to parents or to the close ones, because they know they will be judged, because there's still a lot of stigma in that you are the one to blame, you did something wrong, which is not the case. It's totally legal to share your pictures. So we should start from there. And then from there, like the problem is very complex, as now also Claudia said, now the AI, it's putting on top on everything other problems. So it makes everything very complex, to the point that sometimes the police, for example, in sextortion, it's very difficult to get to the point who was the perpetrator, because very often they see it in Manila, in Indonesia, or they use dark web, which is difficult to track them. So this topic is very, very complex. But the more we talk, the more we are aware, the less we kind of embrace it, that yes, this is part of the society we are in, because the digital world brings amazing things, can bring also huge risks. We just need to be aware, know how to cope. And if it happens to us or to us somebody else, we just should not judge neither of the two, nor blame.
Absolutely. And well, I'm sure this is the beginning of many conversations. Barbara, I don't know if you have a few words to say before we wrap up.
Just quickly, if I may, because it was a beautiful presentation, so thank you for this. But it just got me thinking things that are probably slightly disturbing. So let me walk you through what I'm thinking. So I'd like to, if I may, come back to the deepfake or the revenge porn. And, I understand that it's possible to detect whether it's fake, but it takes time and effort. And I know that it's not so obvious. Like, from what I know, and please correct me if I'm wrong, it takes a lot of time because you need to rewatch it and rewatch it, So I would like to know, how alone is the victim in it, right? Is it up to us, once we realize, to actually detect the deep fake or the porn fake? And then also, do those organizations really walk us through the process? Or again, are we alone, on top of the shame, on top of the judgment, the possible consequences at work if it leaks? And there was another thing, and that's the disturbing part. Probably it's easier to find yourself in a situation where you're a victim of a deep fake using AI and your images, as opposed to when your actual footage gets leaked. You see? So that's the mind game.
yeah. So I think, unfortunately, I won't sugarcoat it, but it is quite a solitary, which is why so many cases just do not get reported or take, because yes, it is just like, well, it's okay. I will, you can still request things to be taken down, and it can happen. But I think in order to really also get to the bottom of it and actually get someone, to report someone and get it out there, it takes a lot of time and encouragement, and you have to have a support system. For the websites, I do also think they do have a lot of work on their hands. So again, it is like, once you reach out to them, they do support you, but it is very much you who has to take that initiative. But what I do want to highlight on that is, it's not just about your case, unfortunately. It's also the fact that the more we report, the more we go, the more we talk about it, the more we actually have the numbers to say, like, look, this is not an isolated thing. This is not happening to one or a few people. This is not happening to someone you know, who is actually putting out her own images, because like, and even if it does happen to someone who puts out their own images, still not their fault. So that's also the reason why it needs to be reported, not just to say like, well, nothing's gonna come out of it, but if it's out there, then it becomes a number, it becomes part of statistics. AI, I mean, it's definitely on the rise, and it's definitely it's definitely a threat. But for now, at least from what I've read and gathered, it's well, unfortunately, it's more like for public figures. And then I think it's very targeted for now. So to be honest, actually, more cases are your actual images. I think AI is like much more targeted in a way. I think I replied to all of them, right? Okay. I don't know if Katja wants to add.
All good.
Yeah.
Well, this is the end for this conversation. For everybody out there, let's get informed and we will share in this post jointly the links of the organizations and the places where you can get more information so that you become more aware for yourself and for the people around you. Let's keep our eyes open and let's not judge. Let's talk about these things. And I'm very grateful to Katja and Ellie and Barbara for this conversation on a very topic and triggering issue, right? And thank you for all the work in breaking the stigma. So let's continue breaking the stigmas and creating a space where everybody can live free from violence online and offline. And so thank you very much, and let's have a conversation together and with others sometime soon.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.